Hi, Alex here with reality checks on MGTOW. This is Post 2, Part 1. What are we checking exactly and why? The reality checks on MGTOW channel attempts to answer the question, is what MGTOW says about the nature of women and the nature of relationships between men and women a credible account? So, where are we now? In Post 1 I set up the approach I was taking to the reality checks on MGTOW channel. This described the position I was starting from and sets out the mechanisms by which we validate our beliefs. I then described the way in which MGTOW propositions about women and relationships could be tested. This was first to look at a case study of a relationship and see how the MGTOW propositions would stack up against it. Secondly, to look at some of the evidence from the science literature, in particular the psychology literature, for an initial assessment of whether the MGTOW propositions about women can be justified by the empirical evidence. In this second post, part 1, of 5 parts in all, I warn you, I'm still preparing the ground for these reality checks by setting out a summary of the main MGTOW propositions. I'm aware as I carry out this exercise that I'm not only reality checking MGTOW, but also reality checking my current relationship, and that as the story unfolds, both may impact each other, probably with unpredictable consequences. So watch this space. Well, that's the background dealt with. On to the case study. I thought that as a test of the coherence and applicability of MGTOW, I would see if it applied in the case of a relationship I have with a woman that is going through yet another trough in what appears to be a regular cyclical pattern. Can the MGTOW view of the world help me understand what's going on? So, part of my motivation is to understand my current relationship that's now been going on for 5 years. For a number of reasons, I feel it needs some serious thought. When I tell people about this relationship, they sometimes ask me for an explanation or justification of why I run with it. The justification for the relationship is given after the case study itself. This is not to defend myself, but to show how justifications are not really about explaining the past, but are constructed to rationalize feelings and validate future intentions. Another part of my motivation is that I'm learning about postmodernism and social constructivist thinking. I'm trying to see if these ideas are really useful in understanding what goes on in relationships and the power dynamics in society more generally. This may sound a bit crazy, but despite everybody having their own theories about this, and a host of political and academic theories, we've hardly touched on a comprehensive theory that describes the mechanism and dynamics of social power. It's my supposition that much the same mechanisms apply to A. Individual decision-making, think of it as competing inner voices arguing it out in the mind. B. The power dynamics that operate in all manner of relationships. And C. The power dynamics that operate at the level of politics, between the state, the citizen, and other organisations. It seems useful to distinguish legitimate and enabling power from coercive and oppressive power. It was this theoretical investigation that led me to the MGTOW video on standpoint theory. It was the first MGTOW item I'd come across, and as far as I was concerned, it just happened to be about feminism. The issues with the girlfriend were a coincidence. I use the term girlfriend, although I doubt she'd describe me as her boyfriend. Coming across the MGTOW standpoint theory post, at the current trough in my relationship, is what inspired me to do these reality checks. I'll explain. I'm used to a woman's philosophical perspective on men, i.e. feminism, and according to reference 4, that can be traced back to the French Revolution. Much of feminism seems to entail a woman's view about how men see women. Philosophical or psychological theories from men about how they see women, apart from the pickup artists, are new to me. Let's look at some of the MGTOW propositions. MGTOW takes the position that women are biologically programmed to be hedonistic and exploitative. Women have learnt a set of techniques for manipulating men and have influenced the structures and laws in society such that they can get men to do all the work and innovating while they consume and distribute the benefits of these activities. Reference 5. What is interesting about both feminism and MGTOW is that they're relatively extreme positions. They help define the boundaries of a space in which male-female relations exist. If for the moment we separate out the perceived degree of oppression by the other sex and the desire to go one's own way, it makes it clear that these are two different but related things. One is a feeling about the other sex, and the other is a feeling about one's own intentions. The two dimensions are almost certainly correlated. Along the diagonal we see a range of women's behaviour towards men, from feminism in the bottom left to oppressing and dominating men in relationships in the top right. Similarly, on the bottom right are MGTOW men, stretching up along the diagonal to relationships where men dominate and oppress women in the top left. Somewhere in the middle are relationships where neither oppress the other, and both have some space to express their individuality. I would speculate that the path to feminism is from women that have been oppressed by men, and similarly the migration path to MGTOW is from men that have been exposed to oppression by women. In principle, I could plot the main MGTOW thought leaders, such as Sandman and Marcus, on this graph. Well, that's for later maybe, when I've had more time to think about it. From my own point of view, I've always regarded myself as a bit of an anti-oppressionist, hence a feminist, as I seem to have never really questioned the implicit belief that it's women who are the oppressed. According to MGTOW, that's precisely what women want men to think. Reference 6. However, demographically, as a white older male, I'm classic MGTOW material. I've also been stung by a relationship breakup involving children that cost me dearly and knocked me back to being an emotional wreck. However, according to the MGTOW classification system, I'm probably only level 1, reference 7, if indeed I'm on the scale at all. My views are a bit like the BBC. I try to balance arguments on both sides. Somehow I came to value equality and cooperation. I like a good fight, but for me it's all academic to get greater understanding, not because I necessarily believe in a particular position or want to win. So, in the spirit of inquiry and analysis, I look here in more detail at some of the MGTOW propositions about women and assess whether they have any validity in general, and, in the case of my own relationships with women, in particular the current one. This would seem to be the one in which the MGTOW analysis best applies. This is a relationship with a black woman who is about 20 years younger than me and who has always insisted that we keep the relationship secret because, she says, she's betrothed to another. Well, her secret is safe because nobody's going to watch this anyway, and certainly nobody that she knows. What's more, I doubt she would be interested in this account, or she'd pretend not to be anyway. The relationship can easily be interpreted as sugar daddy, sugar baby. And indeed, a few years ago when I discovered the nature and extent of this type of thing, I wrote an article called Unsuspecting Sugar Daddy that captured my awakening to this revelation. However, this would be too simple a story, or at least that's what I like to think. First, because there's very little evidence of the betrothed, although I think enough to suggest that he exists somewhere in Europe in some manifestation. What's unclear is the degree of commitment they have to each other, or how much they communicate. And second, because I believe that she and I do have a love for each other. I suppose part of what I'm doing here is trying to discover whether I'm deluded about this. We go through cycles of near breakup and make-up every few months, mainly, as I see it, because of her lack of commitment and communication, and her behaviour that's often over-demanding and disrespectful. Whenever we make up, she seems genuinely happy and relieved, as if she really does need and want me. But within a short time, she has recalibrated to the old ways and starts to make more and more demands. Most of these demands are things that I have no problem with. They involve me providing things that I like to provide, but only up to a point. Once they get excessive, I tell her. Then, when it just gets worse, I can get angry and tell her to go. I think this is something the MGTOW community will have no trouble in understanding. Her demands, even though they're not primarily financial, can be somewhat extreme and self-serving. So, following these episodes, we're then apart for a while until one or other of us finds some face-saving way to make contact and rebuild. According to MGTOW, reference 8, women are biologically programmed to find men that will best provide resources for them and their children and use their sexual power as a primary mechanism of doing this. The women that don't have much sexual power learn to use reason as a tool for getting what they want, and women who do have sexual power tend to develop this and can fail to develop the skill of using reason, reference 9. MGTOW maintains that women have different systems from men with respect to knowing, reference 10, and thought, reference 11. MGTOW reference 11 also describes women as, acting according to Breifeldt's law, reference 12, women are not attached to particular men, but rather their capacity to provide. Hypergamous, reference 13, they are readily willing to switch to a man that will be a better provider, and solipsistic, reference 14, they only know the world from their own point of view, they're self-centered. So, these are the main MGTOW propositions, and they're amongst the ones I've checked to see if they ring true in the case of my girlfriend. See the next part for the test of the MGTOW propositions and the first stage of the verdict, both on MGTOW and on the relationship.